How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi 42 of Masechta Menachos, friends. Okay, Daf Yomi is going to be quick because we already did half of Yomi with Aleph. Because we're only going to do half of Yomi with Beis. Because it's not so difficult. Because Shabbos is starting pretty soon, and I have to edit yesterday's daf and this daf, hopefully before Shabbos starts, and upload at least yesterday's daf. And because I'm not losing my hard-earned buffer. So we're getting this stuff in. Let us go. The main question of this, the main sugya of this daf, I don't even have slides, but the main sugya of this daf is, do you make a bracha on making tzitzis? Interesting question. Obviously, you make a bracha when you put on tzitzis, when you put on a talis. Do you make a bracha of al asiyas tzitzis? Or I think la asos tzitzis or something. Do you make a bracha for making tzitzis? Interesting question. And before that, we're going to discuss what we're also going to see some interesting shitas when it comes to how many strings to put on tzitzis. So pretty interesting stuff, friends. Let's go for it. We begin on Daf Mem Beis Omid Aleph. About halfway through, about a good 20-25 lines into the page. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Rami Dalid. Rav Acha bar Yaakov would have four. Listen to what he would do. He'd have four tzitzis strings, and he would fold them in half. So we usually take four tzitzis strings and put them through the hole. I'm not doing demonstrations today, I don't think. But if you remember the demonstration from yesterday, it's the same demonstration. Similar. If you take you take the four tzitzis strings, and of course we put it through the hole, and like this, half of it is on one side of the hole, the half of it is on the other side of the hole. So four strings are folded over and become 8 strings. Listen to what Rav Acha bar Yaakov would do. He would first fold the strings in half so that there would be 8, and then the fold he would stick through the hole, and then he would take the 8 strings of slack and then basically put it through a slip knot, and that would be, and he would make like a slip knot there at the top of through that hole at the top. Instead of putting 4 strings in, he would basically be putting like 8 strings in, because he would fold it before putting it through the hole. So Acha bar Yaakov Rami Dalid, he would take 4 strings. Va'iflu me'af, he would like flip. He would fold them. He would fold them in half, so that there were 8 strings. Uma'ayolu beglima, and then he would put it through the hole in the garment. Ve'avaklu mevak, and he would then make a slip knot and put all the strings through the hole. Through the folded over hole that went through the hole. Right. Kasavar ba'inan tamanya beglima, because his thinking was that you need 8 strings going through the hole. That in the place where you're basically putting you're threading it, you should have the gedilim was basically, for a gedil was 2, gedilim is 4, which you then divide in half, fold over to be 8, and those 8 should be already by the time that you're putting it into the garment. Rav Yirmiyah midifti Rami Tmanya de inu shitzer v'lo aveklu. Rav Yirmiyah midifti, he would do like we do, just thread, take the threads and put take the strings, put them through the hole. But he would have twice the number of strings, like we had seen yesterday. Right, we had discussed using 8 strings for tzitzis. So he would use 8 strings for tzitzis and then put them through the hole like we do, and he would have 8 strings on one side of the hole, 8 strings on the other side of the hole. V'lo aveklu, he wouldn't do the slip knot thing like Rav Acha bar Yaakov did. Marbrei D'Ravina avid kedidon, and Marbrei D'Ravina did like we do, i.e., the simple take 4 strings, put them through the hole, 4 on this side, 4 on that side. Life is good. Rav Nachman Ashkechelu Rav Ada bar Ahava Remichute v'kamavarich lasos tzitzis givaldik. So Rav Nachman bumped into Rav Ada bar Ahava, who was busy making tzitzis. Givaldik. That sounds like a nice activity. Show of hands. Who here has made their own tzitzis? So Rav Ada bar Ahava was putting tzitzis into his garment, and he was tying tzitzis, and he made the bracha of lasois tzitzis. Amalei, So if Nachman says to Rav Ada bar Ahava, my tzitzei shamayna, what tweeting am I hearing? What is this that I hear? Obviously, he used the word tzitzei to mean whatever sounds he was hearing. Because after all, says Rav Nachman, that Rav says that you don't make a bracha of lasais tzitzis. You don't make a bracha when you're making tzitzis. You wear a bracha when you wear tzitzis, but not when you're making tzitzis. And we're going to discuss why. Now, when Rav Huna died, now Rav was in Surah. Rav Huna was a student of Rav. Rav Huna was also in Surah. I think maybe he took over the yeshiva in Surah after Rav. And then after Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, it seems, was the Rosh Yeshiva in Surah. I know that Rav Huna, and Rav Chizda were all in Surah. I think Rav Chizda may have been in one other place. I think Rav Chizda, it's Gemara in Erevin, I think. I gotta look it up. I gotta find that. I don't remember if it says that Rav Chizda was in. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. Ooh, that's an interesting task. Go find where Rav Chizda was. I think it's somewhere in Erevin, at the bottom of an Amud Beis somewhere. That's where I'm gonna go. So what I'm gonna do is, here's the thing. This is how I find things, friends. You wanna know how I find things? Whenever I'm trying to say, oh yeah, we learned something. Where is it? So it starts with I think it's a Gemara in Erevin. If I could already limit it to Erevin, it's a guess. It's a guess. I suspect it's in Erevin. I think it may have been in Erevin. Maybe Psachim. But I think sometime around then. I think Erevin. Now, it's the kind of thing I would have underlined. If I saw the Gemara say that where Rav Chizda, where he was the Rosh Yeshiva, it's the kind of thing I'd want to remember and I would underline it. So now all I need to do, basically, Erevin is 105 pages? How long does it take to flip through 105 pages? Not long. And I know I am 95% sure that I would have underlined it. And I have a feeling that it's Erevin. So just flip through Erevin, looking at the underlines for where it says Rav Chizda was in Surah or wherever he was, and there you have it. That's how I find things. If I could remember the Masechta, or even a few Masechtas that it might be in, it doesn't take that long to flip through. Sometimes I even remember exactly where it is. So let me see if I could find that. Al Koponim. So at least at some point, Rav Huna, and Rav Chizda were all in Surah. Anyways, so after Rav Huna died, so Rav Chizda was in Surah, he was Rosh Yeshiva, I guess. So all Rav Chizda lemirma derav adarav, and he asked the following question of two seemingly conflicting opinions of Rav. Umi Amar Rav tzitzis ein tzricha bracha. Is it like Rav Nachman said that tzitzis do not require a bracha? V'Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, but Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says on the other hand, minayin tzitzis b'oved kochavim shi psula, that an oved kochavim is not allowed to make tzitzis. A yid has to make tzitzis. Shneimar says daber al bnei Yisrael v'osulem tzitzis. Speak to the yidden, and they will make tzitzis. Bnei Yisrael yaisu v'lo oved kochavim yaisu. You know who makes tzitzis? Yidden. Yidden make tzitzis. Bnei Yisrael, not non-Bnei Yisrael. V'ha my rumya. What exactly is the question? What I don't understand. Rav Nachman says you don't make a bracha on making tzitzis. He quotes Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that only Yidden can make tzitzis. Where's the tie-in to bracha or not? So Rav Yosef says, here's the tie-in. Kasav Rav Chizda holds, Kol mitzvah shekshere b'oved kochavim b'Yisrael ein tzarich levarich. That any mitzvah that can be done by an oved kochavim, so a yid doesn't make a bracha asher kiddishanu b'mitzvah sevitzivon. A yid doesn't make a bracha that you commanded me to do this mitzvah, if even oved kochavim are commanded to do the mitzvah. Or well, not necessarily commanded, but can do it. But it's not specifically my mitzvah, even oved kochavim can do it. Kol mitzvah shepsula b'oved kochavim. But any mitzvah that is possible for an oved kochavim to do, that a yid needs to do it, so then b'Yisrael tzarich levarich a bracha. A yid makes a bracha that you commanded me to do this mitzvah. Me specifically, nobody else is able to do it. So therefore he says, Asher kidshanu b'tzvah sevitzvanu, to do whatever mitzvah. So the question is that how on the one hand would Rav say, Rav Nachman's quoting Rav that there's no bracha on making tzitzis, but Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that only a yid can make tzitzis, and if only a yid can make tzitzis, he should make the bracha of Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu lasais tzitzis. V'chlalu, is this really a general rule that if only a yid could do it, you make a bracha? If not, there's no bracha. B'arei mila, what about bris mila? Diksheir b'oivik kachavim. In oivik kachavim is allowed to perform a bris mila on a yid, as we know from Masechta Avodah Zarah. Decided that we learn in a Beracha, Ir she'ein ba roifei Yisrael, a city that does not have a Jewish moil, v'yesh ba rofei aramoi, but there is a Aramean moil, v'rofei kusi, or a Kusian moil, yimol aramoi ve'al yimol kusi. So preference goes to the Aramean moil rather than the Kusi moil. Divrei Reb Meir, that is the opinion of Reb Meir. Reb Yehuda Omer Kusi v'lo Aramoi, whereas Reb Yehuda says that preference goes to the Kusi over the Aramoi. So we see that non-Yidden, right, whether Aramean who are full on non-Yidden or Kusis who are questionable Yidden at the very least, they're able to do bris milah, and even the machlokes between them isn't about I don't think it's about can a Kusi or Aramean technically are they allowed to do it, or is it that? All right, I'm not going to get into that. Meaning the question is, I'm totally not getting into this. Maybe Tosfos gets into. Okay, I didn't learn this Tosfos. Unfortunately, I ran out of time. Hopefully I'll be able to catch up on it. Anyways, at least according to Reb Meir, an Aramean is able to perform bris milah. The shaila is, does Reb Yehuda, or the shaila thing was that I didn't look up that I would have liked to, is Reb Yehuda's reason to prefer the Kusi because the Aramean, because non-Jews are not allowed to do it, or is it for a different reason? So I just saw here that actually on my daf here, they have here at the bottom what Rashi says in Masechta Avodah Zarah, which is the issue with the Aramean is not that technically a non-Jew is prohibited from being a moel for a yid. That's not the issue. The issue is that we're concerned about shvichus dam. So the point being, when it comes to bris milah, technically speaking, it does not need to be done by a yid. According to everybody, it can be done by a Aramean, a Kusin. Now, a Kusi. Uvisol tzarich levarich. And yet, if we have a Jewish moel, he does make a bracha. Damar Hamol Omer, the moel says, bracha asher k'dshanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu ala milah. And therefore, so we see that you can have a yid make a bracha on even when it's a mitzvah that can be done by a non-yid. To which we reject that and say, no. The thing is, we're interested in Rav over here, right? We're saying, Rav Chizda is saying, on the one hand, Rav says, you don't make a bracha on tzitzis. Apparently, Rav also says that only Yidden can make tzitzis. And therefore, since only Yidden can make tzitzis, you should make a bracha. What about bris milah, which can be done by non-Jews, and yet there's a bracha? Not according to Rav, there's not. Rav mifsal pasil. Rav says that a non-Jew cannot be a moel for a yid. How do you know that milah for a yid done by an ovik chavim is pasul? Dor bar pap mishmei de Rav Omar v'ato es brisi sishmo, that you Yidden should be moels. Rabbi Yochanan Omar himol yimol hamol himol. Only somebody who themselves has a bris milah can perform bris milah on a yid. We went into, there was all these nafkaminas, I think, in Masechta Avodah Zarah. Okay, so anyways, so the thing stands. Okay, so Rav Chizda asked a question on the one hand, he says, I don't understand. Rav is saying that there's no bracha on tzitzis. On the other hand, tzitzis can only be done by a yid, made by a yid, and if it's only made by a yid, then you should make a bracha. So says the Gemara, Sukkah Misa'ele Tefillin Ave Tiyuvte, that sukkah can be brought as a raya to support Rav Chizda's concept, and tefillin will be a question on Rav Chisda's concept. Hari sukkah diksher b'ovikochavim. You see, a sukkah can be built by an ovikochavim, not the schach, but the walls, the structure can be made by an ovikochavim. The sign is willing to buy a sukkah over the kochavim, a sukkah made by over the kochavim, for over the kochavim, sukkahs noshim, the sukkah for women, sukkahs behema, an animal, these structures that animals go in, sukkahs kusim, sukkahs of kusis, sukkah mikol makom, any kind of sukkah structure, ksheira. It needs to, the schach has to be properly put on, but the rest of the structure can be made by anybody. And a yid doesn't make a bracha la'asos sukkah. The sign is limited by sukkah la'asma. A person makes his own sukkah. Okay, I thought I didn't look up this halacha. I am curious to look it up, what exactly it means. And when you go to sit in the sukkah, you make a bracha of leishev basukah. But there's no bracha of la'asos sukkah, to make a sukkah. And it also happens to be that a yid doesn't have to be the one to make it, to put up the schach, though, yes. So tefillin tiyuvte. Now the thing is, when it comes to tefillin, though, it's going to be tricky for Rav Chisda, because tefillin the psulos b'ovikochavim, of the kochavim are not allowed to make tefillin. Only yidden can make tefillin. The Tani Rav Chinina Brei the Rava taught, Rav Chinina Brei the Rava mi pashranya. Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzos, when it comes to stam, when it comes to Sefer Torah, when it comes to tefillin, when it comes to mezuzos, sheiksovan stuki, written by a Sadducee, a Kusi, of a Kochavim, Eved, Isha, Vikain, Mumar, Psulin, Shenemar, Ukshaitim, Uchsavtim, Kol Sheyeshnu B'Kshira, Yeshnu B'Chsiva. Only somebody who has the mitzvah of tying tefillin or putting on tefillin has the mitzvah of writing tefillin. Kol She'enu B'Kshira, Einu B'Chsiva. And if they don't have the mitzvah of putting on tefillin, they don't have the mitzvah of writing tefillin either. So tefillin must be written by a yid. Okay, so according to Rav Chisda, then you should make a bracha of, I don't know, lichtov tefillin or something. And yet, yidden don't make a bracha of writing tefillin. As we learned the other day, the shalach of Chia Breder of Huna, Mishmeder of Yochanan, al tefillin shal yad, omer baruch hashem kedushat mitzvah v'tzivanu le'aniach tefillin. Al tefillin shal rosh, omer baruch hashem kedushat mitzvah v'tzivanu al mitzvahs tefillin. Vilu lasos tefillin lo mevarach. There's no bracha of lasos tefillin, even though it has to be made by a yid. Rather, this is pshat. Here's the determining factor for when you make a bracha on a mitzvah and when you don't. You ready? Kol mitzvah da asiyasa gemar mitzvasa. Any mitzvah that when you do it, you do the whole mitzvah. Kigon mila. When a mola does bris mila, he makes the bracha of ala mila, he does the mila, done. Sure, it might be able to be doable by an ovikochavim, but nonetheless, when a yid does it, he makes a bracha. And whenever you have something that, when you do it, you're not doing the whole mitzvah, kigon tefillin. Like tefillin. The mitzvah is not to write tefillin, the mitzvah is to put on the tefillin. So even when you write the tefillin, you're not doing the mitzvah of tefillin, you're writing the tefillin, but the mitzvah of tefillin is to put it on. And when you put it on, you make the bracha. So even though it might be possible by avukachim, sure, tefillin has to be written by a yid, a yid would not make a bracha. A yid would not make a bracha. And therefore, right, in a situation when doing the mitzvah is not the complete mitzvah, right, also by sukkah. So for example, right, making the sukkah, that's not, the mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah, not to make a sukkah. And therefore, you don't make a bracha on that either. And therefore, the machlokes when it comes to tzitzis, where Rav Nachman was telling Rav Ada bar Ahava, why are you making a bracha on tzitzis? You don't make a bracha on tzitzis. Rav Chisda is saying you should make a bracha on tzitzis. It's thus. Uv'tzitzis b'akamifagim ma'asover chovas talasu u'ma'asover chovas gavru. The machlokes is that According to Rav Chizda, tzitzis is a chovas talis. The mitzvah is that this garment should have tzitzis on it. And therefore, by making the tzitzis, you are being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, of making sure that a four-cornered garment has on it fringes. And therefore, you make a bracha of lasses tzitzis, and you put on the tzitzis, and you did the mitzvah. However, Rav Nachman holds that it's chovas gavra. The mitzvah is for the person to put on the tzitzis. Lisate tzitzis. Not to make the tzitzis. Making the tzitzis is great. But you mekayim the mitzvah when you put it on. And therefore, Rav Nachman says you don't make a bracha on making the tzitzis. Rav Motchil, Rav Ashi. Now Rav Motchil says to Rav Ashi, Atun ochi, masnisu, sure, you taught the statement of Rav Yehuda Amarav, who said that only Yidden can make tzitzis. And you have the whole question. But we teach on Rav Yehuda Amarav, minayin the tzitzis ba'ovek kochavim sheksheira. How do we know that Ovek Kochavim can make tzitzis? Shneimar Dabro b'nei Suv asulem tzitzis, that they will make for the Yidden tzitzis. Yasulem acherim, others will make them tzitzis. Meaning, Rav Chizda's whole question, his whole premise was, on the one hand, Rav says you don't make a bracha on tzitzis. I'm making tzitzis. On the other hand, Rav says that tzitzis must be made by a Yid. If tzitzis must be made by a Yid, then surely you would make a bracha. Says Rav Motchit to Rav Ashi, he says, look, the thing is that we teach, that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, that tzitzis doesn't need to be made by a Yid. Well, if Rav Chizda would have known that Rav says, A, you don't make a bracha on making tzitzis, and B, tzitzis can be made by an Ovek Kochavim, totally makes sense now. There's no question anymore. So it says Rav Motchit to Rav Ashi that according to you, that you have that you're saying that according to that Rav Yehuda is saying the name of Rav that only Yidden can make tzitzis. It's a question, but according to me, I said that Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav that non-Yidden are allowed to make tzitzis, and therefore the question goes away. I understand why there's no bracha on tzitzis. I'm making tzitzis. Cheve, that was Daf Menbeis. That we're going to stop there. That was Menbeis, Daf 42 of Masechta Menachos. We learned at the beginning different styles of stringing the tzitzis, whether it was Rav Acha bar Yaakov who folded over the tzitzis and stuck them to the hole, made a slip knot, or whether it was Rav Yirmi Midifti, I think, who had 16 strings, or Ravina, who Marbre de Ravina, who just did like we did, 4 strings put through the hole and draped over on, 4 on this side, 4 on that side. And then we got into the question of making a bracha on making tzitzis. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav, there's no bracha. Rav Chizda wanted to argue that there is a bracha. And we be'etzim had 2 ways of understanding their machlokas. One way of understanding the machlokas is that, well, you only make a bracha on something when you do the mitzvah, you do the whole mitzvah. For example, bris milah, you make a bracha al milah, and you do the bris milah, done, there's nothing else that needs to be done. However, when there are still more steps, like writing tefillin, where the mitzvah isn't to write the tefillin, the mitzvah is to put on the tefillin, so then you wouldn't make a bracha on that. And the machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda is about, is the mitzvah to make the tzitzis, or is the mitzvah to wear the tzitzis? The mitzvah is to make the tzitzis, then you make a bracha, like Rav Chizda says. If the mitzvah is to wear the tzitzis, then you don't make a bracha on making the tzitzis, you make a bracha on wearing the tzitzis, on putting it on. We then saw a different approach, which is that actually the whole premise of the question was faulty, which is that it's only, Rav Chizda was only saying to make a bracha because he assumed that Rav had said that only Yidden can make tzitzis. But it turns out there's another tradition of what Rav said, which was that even non-Yidden can make tzitzis, in which case it's completely understandable that there would be no bracha. Even Rav Chizda, that with that information, Rav Chizda would agree with that. Friends, that was that 42 of Masech Menachos. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.